I have an interview, I know I'm going to have to prepare. I'm going to have to research. And I know interview prep, Clint, that is one of your favorite things. Talk me through it. What should I do?
Oh, um, man, there's so much content out there now. And I know the other day, I think either you or Ben, both of you guys brought up like, first thing is if there's video content that deals with that company, start binge watching content about that company. Like skip your Netflix for the night or your Prime series. Go dive in to whatever YouTube content they have or video content they have for that company. Um, it's pretty cool, especially if it's innovation, if it's innovative tech company or startup. Just dive into it. And whether it's watching people that are at conferences speaking that are representing that company, or if it's product demos, whatever's out there, binge everything. It's like, well, what else do you have to do? You don't have to sit there and read, just pop it on. A lot of times they'll have a playlist saved to everything that has to do with that company. Pop it in, start listening. At the very least, just have it in the background so you're listening to it to start to build up your prep. As far as researching the actual hiring managers, one, try to find out everyone that you might meet. That's like Ben was saying, you might end up meeting 4 or 5 different people throughout a short span of time. Start researching all of them. Look at their career paths of how they got to into the role that they're in. Take notes of that. Have like one interesting question for each of them. So no matter who it is, you can at least ask like, hey, I saw you were this, or I saw you went to school here, or I saw you had a degree in this. How did you go from here to there? Like start to find that way you have ammunition that's a personalized question for each person that hops on the call. Um, the other piece is, and Ciara, I'd love for you and Ben both to bring up this part about comparing notes. Both of you guys had different styles or a similar approach, but a different style. Like, how do I look at the job description versus my resume in prep? Because one of the things that we do, we're sending out dozens of resumes, right? Like we as recruiters, but you as a candidate, you're sending out all kinds of different versions of your resume that you've tailored for each job that you have applied to. Make sure you have the version that you sent to this company, and then you have the job description that you did apply for, and then lay them out. So Ben, so let me go Ciara first. Ciara, how would you handle that once you got your job description here and you got the resume here? How do you handle that diving into it?
So I am a very visual person. Y'all know because you work with me, but I color code things. I tell people print it out, bring out your colored pens or your highlighters, and go through. So anywhere the job description talks about building out APIs, those are going to be pink. I'm going to go through my resume and I'm going to highlight all of that in pink. Then I can draft an answer if I'd like, but just so it comes up to the top of my mind, so it's not 20 minutes into the conversation and I jump back, oh yeah, actually, when I was at this company, I want to know all of it ahead of time. So I tell people color code things, bring it out, break it out that way. Ben, but you have a different approach.
I do. I'm a bit of a note taker on my side. So typically what I do if I'm looking at a job description and I'm thinking about how my resume can align to that, and obviously conveying my skills to that as well, right? So I'm looking at a job description and I'm taking specific notes on that job description and just out beside the bullet points in the margins of ways that I can add my experience, ways that I can add my knowledge to address those areas so that when the question comes to me in the course of a conversation, I've got a quick ready reference point that I can go to and just and speak to it pretty effectively on that end. I'm not a big color coder. I'm more old school in the black and white, but that's just kind of how I go about it in my end.
And something we didn't talk about beforehand, but I wanted to bring up is, especially now with like ChatGPT and Gemini, you can throw the job description into there and say, bring me up a list of interview questions and workshop your answer that way. Even if it's not going to be the exact same question, you have a reference point. For example, my partner, he just had an interview recently and we were in the car driving and I was like, all right, hit me, I'm gonna interview you. Let's go through the questions, let's go through the answers, and we can work on word tracks. We can work on how to best phrase things.
I think that's great. Yeah, you could ask Gemini or ChatGPT. You're correct. Like drop the job description and say, write me 5 really good interview questions that I might get asked for this job. And then you could practice. Kind of like taking notes from both of you guys is verbally processing and verbally like walking through your answers out loud is actually a good thing to practice, especially if you have not interviewed in let's say 10 years, 15 years, or you're brand new to interviewing. You just graduated college or you just finished a boot camp for your skill set and it's time to go interview. I know every once in a while there's mock interviews that they have for you, but just practicing articulating out loud is huge because you don't get a lot of redos, right? You get once to say it, and you're like, I didn't say that the right way, and you can actually be technically very sound and know what you're talking about. And it's just you and a keyboard, you're fine. But when you start to articulate it out loud, you might skip something or or maybe not clarify enough for that person. And also kind of a note on that too is when you do answer questions, when you do give an answer back, ask them like, would you like more information or do you need me to clarify? Like after you give a long answer to a hiring manager, ask them if that was enough. Because sometimes they'll be like, no, I'm good. Sometimes like, no, please expand on that. Like, let's keep workshopping on this one. You want to invite them to keep diving in and ask you more questions after your answer.
Before we dig into that topic a little more, I wanted to bring up, I just remembered this, when I was in undergrad for one of my classes, I think it was communications, we did a mock interview, and then as an assignment, we had to watch it back and take notes. So we could look at things like and it was terrible. It was really awful. But you had to look at things like your body language. Do you stutter? I fidget. Are you saying a lot? So you can really see the issues that, you're not going to notice when you're going live. So that's always an option. Go and record yourself, and it's miserable, but it's worth it. So digging back into what Clint was saying, how should I describe my aptitude in an interview? How would you go about that?
Ben, you want to give this a shot first? I know something I like to talk about. But you want to give it a shot? Then I'll dive back in.
Sure. I'll say this, and it kind of plays off of something you said a moment ago. I tend to try to avoid long answers if possible. The main thing that I would say to that is do it in a concise way, right? And going back to what Clint was saying a moment ago in terms of practicing beforehand, if you've got time to set aside 15, 20-second pitches, for lack of a better phrase, for questions that you're expecting to come in that you're anticipating, it'll help you during the course of an interview and being able to relay your skill set and being able to relay your knowledge. The main thing I would say as far as articulating your mindset and your skill set is just to always try to be concise, try not to get too long-winded in your responses, because that can just lead you into, for lack of a better phrase, verbal effluvia. We don't want to do that when they're on the spot and in the moment there. But Glenn, I'll yield to you.
Yeah. One of the things that I find interesting is been placing people in technical roles for a very long time and seeing where people can jump the gap on a tech stack. Say, okay, the manager's they're asking about React, but you're more of an Angular person. Like, hey, they're similar things, similar skill set, but they are technically different, right? Seeing where people can describe how did they go about learning that, why did they learn it, and what did they get done with it? And that's really that concise moment where you could be, ooh, I have not worked with that yet, but here's something I worked with that was similar. This is why I had to go learn it. And this is my process of learning. I went and took a tutorial. I went and built a hello world using, I went on GitHub and grabbed some sample projects and I replicated it until I got to go live. Like giving actual real life example of like, how did you go about learning, but not killing them with over information. Be like, so when I was in 6th grade, I got my first computer, like, no, like let's talk about the last thing you had to learn quickly and show that you effectively turned it around and made something productive out of it.
I'll speak to the learning process real quickly too. A lot of times that's what an employer wants to hear, right? How you think, how you learn, how you process information, how you engage material and information that's in front of you, right? So that's a very good point there as far as just being able to kind of, if you don't know a certain technology, being able to kind of articulate how you would go about engaging that and becoming fluent in it, for lack of a better phrase. So.
And I like to phrase that as when I prep people as I don't know Google Docs, but I know Microsoft Excel, and I hear it's very, very similar. And I know a lot of the answers are going to be a lot more complex, but it shows the transferable skills.
Not only and that's probably part of the, sorry, one thing when we're talking about prepping or new research, as you're prepping and looking at the environment that they say is a technical stack, and going into that interview that you're probably going to have a gap between what you know and what they are listening as a tech stack, go dive into that information. Don't just go find that
Dense
blindly.
research.
Yeah, that's another part of your research besides just researching the company. If they mention some particular tool, especially if it's like an automated testing tool, and you're like, well, I'm really good at Selenium or whatever tool you have, like, and they mention some other ones, just go research it, watch some YouTube videos on it, because most likely, if it's competing in that same bucket, it's probably going to be a similar type of software, which I think we're going to talk about a little bit later. But Ciara, when you look, when it's time, I can give everybody some tips of places to go look to find the competitive softwares.
And I was going to bring up, in addition to the job description, when you're on LinkedIn doing your research, look up people with the job title that you're applying to and read what they have. It's probably going to be a really good indicator of what you're stepping into. So staying on our preparation, but moving on, it is important to come to an interview with questions ready for the employer, right? We talked about it's two ways. What are some questions that you like candidates to ask? What are your thoughts here? I will start with Clint, if that works.
Sure. So we've already covered a little bit about looking at the stress of the hiring manager. So my initial wave for questions would be, what's keeping you up at night? I know it sounds kind of silly, but if you can ask somebody at any moment in their job, hey, what keeps you up at night as far as what projects are going on? What keeps you up at night as far as your team right now? You're getting them to open up and really like tell you what's truly going on. Now they might laugh that off a little bit, like, oh, okay, like that's a little much, like with it maybe it's a little too nebulous and touchy feely. But the next level down from that is asking them directly, like, hey, where could I relieve your stress in that first like 30 days I'm on the team or first 90 days I'm on the team? Again, we're trying to look for like what's the really tough things are happening, what's the truth of it, why do you even need to hire right now? So asking, where can I come in and add value in the first 90 days? Where can I reduce your stress in the first 90 days if I'm on that team? The reason I'm asking that way in a very personal, like, can you see me there, is you start to have this conversation with the hiring manager that you guys aren't looking across the table at each other. You now pulled your chair over and you're shoulder to shoulder and you're looking at the problem with them together. That feeling and that the rest of that call being like, hey, we're talking about this together, not versus each other. Once you can get that part of the conversation heading in the right direction, even if you do have a skill gap that you knew was going to be an issue, you're like, well, I never worked with that yet. Just because you get on that side of the desk with them to approach the problem, they might be, that's okay. Like, I see that you're passionate about this. I see that you always have a good question. Like, that might win them over and make them feel comfortable versus you have to have the hard skill that they've been asking about. Another question is asking them why they're making decisions with the tech, particularly in tech. Why did they make a decision to use the stack that they're using? Like, why did you guys go with this version of the ERP? Why did you go with this version of Angular? Why did you go with this version of where it might be? Whatever different tools they are. And hearing them give you the rationale of why actually give you a good understanding of how that hiring manager works, but also gives you an understanding of how the whole company works. Because sometimes they'll say, well, due to budget, we can only do this. Or it was more of like, hey, we had this unlimited budget because our leadership believes that this is one of the most important things, that's going on. So it can start to shed some light on how's the decision making happen with that particular hiring manager. And again, if you're trying to get indications like why or if this is going to be the right job for me, asking questions about how they make decisions on the tech stack is going to help you with that. Last question I would ask is, again, going back to tough situations, like can you walk me through what's the toughest problem you think I'll have to take on? What's the toughest challenge I'll probably have to take on if I get brought on board? Again, if they can relay that to you, what they think is tough, and for you, you might think is a walk in the park. You don't want to laugh it off, but you want to say, I really love those problems. Give them to me. Like, those are the things I enjoy doing. Here's an example of one I did that was really similar in my last job or my current job.
And I don't want to stay on this topic too long, but Ben, quickly, any thoughts, any additions?
I'll go back to the overarching point of asking a great question. I always tell people when I'm helping them prepare for interviews that the power of a great question is oftentimes more impactful than the power of a great answer, because it shows how you think. It shows how you engage. Again, engage that information in front of you. It shows your problem solving. It gives a leading indicator of your problem solving capabilities and things of that nature. But again, companies are not necessarily hiring, even though you've got the job description, it's got the 7 required bullet points and the 5 required bullet points. They're not necessarily hiring those bullet points. They're hiring you. And so if you're able to articulate and able to ask questions in a way that really demonstrates your curiosity, I think you've got a leg up already, on that standpoint. Going to Clint's, examples of technology stacks. Another thing to think about is processes. Why does your company operate in these fashions? What could we do to improve the processes here, or here? And whatever those areas are. And not everyone on this call is a technical guy or girl. We've got other skill sets as well. So be thinking in terms of that. If you're not an IT individual, be thinking about terms of processes. How can you step in and help them fulfill their need within the processes that they've got going on within those roles, and how can you better them if it's a process improvement standpoint. So yeah, the whole mindset, though, again, is when it comes to asking great questions, it's really just to show how you think, how you operate, and your level of curiosity throughout the engagement of a process.
And I just want to add, take in mind what you've picked up from the personality of the person interviewing you. One of my favorites was, I had a candidate, I think he was a software engineer interviewing, and they asked the dreaded, "What is your biggest weakness?" And it was going very well. They were very personable. And he's like, "I don't know, probably bears. I don't think I'd do well up against a bear." And they loved that answer. Now, that's not what I coach people. I personally go with spelling. I cannot spell 3-letter words. That's why I have Grammarly. I usually coach something like that. But, in that moment, it worked because he was getting on so well with the team, and that kind of leaned back into his culture fit.
Right. That's a great answer. Bears. I don't think I would do well with bears, man. I'm jealous of that answer.
You should have thought of it first.